I wasn't sure where else to post these stories, so I figured I'd share them here on Reddit. I've been a search and rescue officer for a few years now, and along the way I've seen some things that I think you guys will be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path, or slip down a small cliff and can't find their way back up. The majority of them have heard the old "stay where you are" thing, and they don't wander far, but I've had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both still bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons cases I get called on. The first case was a little boy who was berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time both of the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked where her brother was, she told us that he'd been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of this bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair, like a bear, hence bear man, and that he had a weird face. We searched the area for weeks, and it was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. The other case was a young woman who was out hiking with her mum and grandpa. According to the mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she'd never come back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name, before they called for help. Again, we searched everywhere, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea to this day where she could have possibly gone, because neither her mother or grandpa saw her come down. This is long, so I apologise for that. I never had to tell this story with enough detail to actually explain it all the way. But it is true, and it happened when I was around 6 years old. In a quiet room, if you press your ear against a pillow, you can hear your own heartbeat. As a kid, the muffled, rhythmic beats sounded like soft footsteps on a carpet floor, and so as a kid almost every night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I would hear these footsteps and I would be ripped back to consciousness, terrified. For my entire childhood, I lived with my mother in a fairly nice neighbourhood that was in a transitional phase. People of lower economic means were gradually moving on, and my mother and I were 2 of those people. We lived in the kind of house you see being transported into 2 pieces of the interstate, but my mum took good care of it. There were a lot of woods surrounding the neighbourhood that I would play in and explore during the day, but at night, as things often do as a kid, they took on a more sinister feeling. This, coupled with the fact that, due to the nature of our house, there was a fairly large crawl space underneath, filled my mind with imaginary monsters and inescapable scenarios which would consume my thoughts when I was woken by those footsteps. I told my mum about the footsteps, and she said that I was just imagining things. Despite all the creepiness and footsteps, the only weird thing that ever happened was that every now and then I would wake up at the bottom of the bunk despite having gone to sleep on the top. But this wasn't really weird, since I'd sometimes get up to piss or get something to drink and could remember just going back to sleep on the bottom bunk. This would happen once or twice a week, but waking up on the bottom bunk wasn't too terrifying. But one night I didn't wake up on the bottom bunk. I'd heard the footsteps, but was too far gone to be woken up by them, and when I was awoken it wasn't from the sound of the footsteps or a nightmare, but because I was cold. Really cold. And when I opened my eyes, I saw stars. I was in the woods. I sat up immediately and tried to figure out what was going on. I thought I was dreaming, but that didn't seem right, though neither did me being in the woods. There was this deflated pool float right next to me. One of those ones shaped like a shark. This only added to the surreal feeling, but after a while it seemed like I just wasn't going to wake up because I wasn't asleep. I stood up to orient myself, but I didn't recognise these woods. I played in the woods by my house all the time, as I knew them really well, but if these weren't the same woods, then how could I get out? I took a step and felt a sharp pain in my foot, which knocked me back to where I'd just been laying. I had stepped on a fawn. By the light of the moon, I could see that they were everywhere. I looked at my other foot, but it was fine, and as a matter of fact, so was the rest of me. I didn't have another scratch on me, and I wasn't even that dirty. I remember crying for a little bit, and then stood back up. I didn't know which way to go, so I just picked a direction. I resisted the urge to call out, since I wasn't sure I wanted to be found by who or what was out there. I walked for what seemed like hours. I tried to walk in a straight line, and tried to course correct when I had to take detours, but I was just a kid, and I was scared. There weren't any howls or screams, and only once did I hear any noise that scared me. It sounded like a crying baby. Thinking back now, I think it might have just been a cat, but I panicked at the time. I ran, veering into different directions to avoid big bushes and collapsed trees. I paid too much attention to where I was stepping and not enough to where these steps were leading, because not long after hearing the cry, I saw something that filled me up with a kind of despair I haven't experienced since. It was the pool float. It was only 10 feet from where I'd woken up. This wasn't magic or some supernatural space bending. I was completely lost. Up until that moment I thought more about getting out of the woods and how I got in, but being back at the beginning caused my mind to swim. I wasn't even sure that these were my woods. I had only been hoping that they were. Had I ran in a huge circle around that spot, or did I just get turned around and start walking my way back? How was I going to get out? At the time I thought the North Star was just the brightest star, and so I looked and found the brightest one and followed it. Eventually things started to look more familiar, and when I saw the ditch me and my friends played in, I knew I had made it out. By that point, I was walking really slowly because my feet hurt so much, but I was so happy to be so close to home that I broke into a light jog. When I actually saw the roof of my house over a neighbouring, lower set house, I let out a light sob and ran faster. I just wanted to get back home. I had already decided that I wouldn't say anything because I had no idea how I could explain it. I didn't know what to say. I would get back in the house somehow, clean up, and get to bed. But my heart sank as I rounded the corner and my house came fully into view. Every light in the house was on. I knew my mum was up, and I knew I'd have to explain, or at least try to explain, where I had been, and I couldn't even figure out where to start. My run became a jog, which then became a walk. I saw my mum's silhouette through the blinds, and though I was worried about how to explain things to her, that didn't matter to me at that point. I walked up the couple of steps to the porch and put my hand on the doorknob and turned. Right before I pushed it open, two arms wrapped around me and pulled me back. I screamed as loud as I could, "Mum! Help me, please, Mum!" The feeling of being so close to being safe, and then being physically pulled away from it, filled me with a kind of dread that is, even after all these years, indescribable. As I screamed, the door I had been torn away from opened, and a flash of hope shot through my heart. But it wasn't my mother. It was a man, and he was enormous. I thrashed around, kicking at the shins of the person holding me back, while I was also trying to get away from the person who had just come out of my house. I was scared, terrified, but I was furious. "Let me go," I screamed. "Where's she? Where's my mum? What did you do with her?" As my throat stung from screaming and I was drawing in another breath, I became aware of a sound that had been present for longer than I perceived. "Honey, please calm down. I've got you." It sounded like my mother. The arms loosened and set me down, and as the man approaching me blocked out the porch light with his head, I noticed his clothes. He was a cop. I turned to face the voice behind me and saw that it really was my mum. Everything was okay. "I'm so glad you're home, sweetie," she said. "I was worried I'd never see you again." By that point, she was crying too. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I just wanted to come home. I'm sorry." "It's okay, just don't ever do that again. I'm not sure me or my shins could take it." A little laughter broke out through my sobs, and I smiled a bit. "Well, I'm sorry for kicking you, but why'd you have to grab me like that?" She paused. "I was just afraid that you ran away again." I was confused. "What do you mean? I didn't run away." "We found a note on your pillow, dear," she said, and pointed at a piece of paper that the police officer was sliding across the table. I picked up the note and read it. It was a running away letter. It said that I was unhappy and never wanted to see her or any of my friends again. It was strange. The police officer exchanged a few words with my mum on the porch while I stared at the letter. I didn't remember writing the letter. I didn't remember anything about any of this. But one thing was for sure. Maybe it was possible that I'd sleepwalked. Maybe it was possible I sleepwalked out of the house and into the woods. But I was certain about just one thing. That wasn't how I spelt my name. Search and Rescue 2. One of the scariest things that had ever happened to me involved the search for a young woman who'd gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out until late at night because the dogs had picked up a scent. We found her curled up under a large rotten log. She was missing her shoes and pack, and she was clearly in shock. She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to the base ops. Along the way, she kept on looking behind us and asking why that big man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone, so we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock. But the closer we got to the base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her. At one point, she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. When we finally got her moving again, we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like. I don't really know how else to describe it, actually. When we were within the sight of the base ops, the woman turns to me, and her eyes are about as wide as I can imagine a human could open them. She touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." Let me elaborate. I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. And right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing again right next to my ear, and I just about jump out of my skin. I hustled her to the ops, trying not to show her how freaked out I was, but I have to say I was really happy when we left the area that night. "733. The suicide room. That's what they call room 733. As if I didn't have enough to worry about on my first day as a freshman. We had been assigned to dorm room 734, which, it turns out, wasn't one of the nice add-on rooms in the South Hall. No, we had found ourselves in the older wing of the building on the 7th floor. I wasn't too bummed out, mind you, though. At least it honoured my request to room with my best friend. Lydia and I spent most of the morning moving ourselves in. By the time our resident advisor came, I was taping up posters and Lydia was reading on her bed. "Hi girls, I'm Beth," chirped the bubbly blonde girl as she bounded into our room. "I'll be your RA this year." "Hi," I nodded at her. "Wow, you girls really work fast," she said, taking in our made beds and hung up clothes. Beth picked up a drawing of Cthulhu that Lydia had done over the summer. She turned it sideways, studying it. "Is this the Kraken of the Pirates of the Caribbean?" Lydia glared at her over the top of her book. Sensing her annoyance, the RA continued, "So anyway, I know our hall isn't as new as the South Hall, but trust me, there's a lot of history here. The building is almost 60 years old." "Yes, I can see that, but I don't give a shit," I said, looking around. "The rooms are pretty small." "Well, people were smaller than the 50s, Beth shrugged. "Really?" Lydia said flatly. "Yep, really." Beth didn't really seem to catch Lydia's sarcasm. She pursed her lips and just continued to stand there, while the room filled with awkward silence. So," I said, "the corner room next to us, 733 is it? It looks a lot bigger than our room. Is anyone assigned to that room, or could we maybe—" "Oh, you don't want that room," Beth interrupted. "There were a couple of suicides there a while back. A hanging and a jump if I remember right. They're not assigning anyone to that room. Anyway, I'd just like to remind you that this is an all-girls floor, and guys are not allowed up here after 11. Before we could reply to her, Beth clapped her hands and with a quick, "Well, nice to meet you," she skipped out of the room. Lydia dropped her book on the bed and stared out into the hall. "I hate her," she said. "Did you hear that bomb she fucking dropped? I'm going to call her dumbshit Beth." "Lydia, seriously, suicides? I didn't want to know about that." "Oh, Becca, relax. Every college campus has a few suicides." "Yeah, but in the same room?" Lydia sighed. "Who really cares? It's not our room after all." "Yeah, I guess." I turned to study the little window in our room. Can you imagine climbing out of that tiny window and jumping? You'd be alive for at least 5 seconds before you hit the ground and died. "Oh fuck, Becca, can you not?" Lydia glanced at the window and visibly shuddered. "You know I fucking hate heights, and just talking about that shit is raising my blood pressure." "We could always move to the suicide room," I teased her. "That one has a window on each wall." "Oh fuck you." Okay, but seriously, think about it. It would take a lot of commitment to squeeze out of that tiny window. Don't you remember? People were apparently smaller back then. Lydia mumbled as she imitated Beth. Since Lydia was an outgoing and friendly person, we made a lot of friends at lightning speed. There were a lot of parties in those first few weeks, and one of which Lydia inevitably met a guy. I'd known the girls since we were in diapers, so I fully anticipated her having a boyfriend by the end of September. His name was Mike, and he wasn't anything special really, just your standard frat pledge douche canoe. After about a month on campus, the novelty of college started wearing off. Lydia and I found our stride and we spent more weekends studying than drinking. Midterm was coming up in a few weeks, and I was determined to maintain a 4 GPA throughout my freshman year. But it was one night in early October that I was awoken by a loud grinding sound. I sat up in bed and strained to hear it again. Lydia was also wide awake and listening. "What the fuck?" she mouthed to me. It wasn't unusual for there to be a noise in the hallways since other people came in at all hours of the night, but this sound had definitely come from the next door, the corner room. "Is that—" I whispered. "Yeah," Lydia said. "That's the window next door." After Lydia's insistence, we kept our window closed at all times. However, there was no mistaking the sound of the window in room 733 being opened and closed again and again at regular intervals. "Who's in there?" Lydia shrugged. "Is someone fucking with us? Is this like an initiation?" Lydia raised one eyebrow at me. Initiation to what? I don't know, college. Maybe they're hazing the freshmen. Who's gonna haze the freshmen? I shrugged at that. Becca, I love you, but that was fucking stupid. I threw a pillow at her. Well, whoever it is, go and tell them to fuck off. Me? I'm not risking being thrown out a window. Well, I'm not doing it, I said. I'm an arts major, she replied. You're a political science major. You go lay down the law. Fuck that. Then call that dumb shit Beth. Isn't this the kind of nonsense she should be dealing with? I'm not calling her. Don't you put that evil on me. Fine, Lydia whispered loudly. Then we'll just have to ignore it. But I have a class at 7:30, I whispered. Then you do something! I got out of bed and stomped to the door, threw it open dramatically, and went down the hall to pound on the door to room 733, which simply said, Supply room. Excuse me. People are trying to sleep. Please fucking stop. There was no answer. Dude, seriously, I sighed, and I tapped on the door again. I stepped back from the door and immediately noticed a problem. Room 733 was padlocked shut from the outside. I hurried back to my room. What happened? Lydia asked. I'm not going anywhere near that fucking room again. It's locked from the outside. I don't know how anybody could have got in there. So you're saying it's a spooky ghost? She laughed. We didn't hear the window next door again that night, but the next morning you could clearly see from outside that both windows in the corner room were now wide open. I watched the windows on room 733 for an entire week, but they remained open. Occasionally at night, I thought I could hear a noise next door like marbles dropping and rolling across the floor. Since it never woke Lydia up, I didn't bother to say anything, in case it scared her. One afternoon I was alone in my dorm, editing notes on my laptop. I had my headphones in, but the music wasn't loud enough to cover the noise of someone knocking on the door. Come in, I said without looking up from my screen. A moment went by, and then I heard the knocking again. I took my headphones off and slammed the laptop closed. I turned around. What the fuck? The door to the hallway was wide open. I left it open on purpose since Ian, a junior I had been dating since October, was supposed to be stopping by. I heard the knocking again from behind me, and I literally jumped out of my chair. It had come from the other side of the room. The closet door. It was a closet that shared a wall with room 733. Damn you, Lydia, you're not fucking funny. Lydia, I said you're not funny. No reply. Lydia, I swear to God, I will punch you in your face. I walked over to the closet door and grasped the handle. Lydia, you're a fucking what? Her voice came from the doorway, right behind me. I let go of the doorknob and stumbled back, wide-eyed. Lydia threw her stuff on the bed and turned to me, crossing her arms. I'm a fucking what did you say? Sorry, I thought you were hiding in the closet, I said. What? Why? Lydia seemed exasperated. Well, because someone was knocking on the door. Jesus, Becca. Lydia rubbed her forehead and walked over to the closet, throwing open the door. There was nothing there but clothes and boxes. She made a swipe of her arm as if to say, what now? Shocked, I stumbled. I swear, Becca, there's no one here. But I know what I heard. We glared at each other until our little standoff was interrupted by the timely arrival of Ian. He immediately sensed the tension in the room. Hi ladies, what's new? I gave my roommate a hostile look. There's strange shit going on in the room next door. Which room? 735 or the empty one? The empty one, Lydia emphasized. 733. Yeah, I'm not surprised. That's a suicide room, isn't it? Right, we heard about the deaths. I sat down on my bed. Yeah, it's pretty fucked up. 3 suicides all in one dorm room. 3? Lydia raised one eyebrow. We were only told about 2. Well, there were a couple of people in the 70s and then some guy about 10 years ago. He jumped out the window. Lydia and I both shuddered. Although she was much worse, we were both terrified of heights. A falling death was about the worst thing I could think of. I will admit that these 3 suicides in the same dorm room is fucking disturbing, Lydia said in an apologetic tone. But what you're saying is still crazy. Yeah, I heard there's something in that room, Ian said. Like what? No one knows, but every year someone has a new theory. Usually right around Halloween, something gets published in the campus paper. But whatever's in there, it's not friendly. So has anyone ever killed themselves in the neighbouring rooms like this one? Nah, it's just 733, don't worry. Honestly, I was surprised when I heard that they were opening the North Hall this year though. They told us we were the biggest incoming freshman class in 20 years, I said absent-mindedly. That's probably why. Yeah, I heard that too. You know, you could request a room change if you're really scared. Ian sat down on the bed next to me, and I leaned against his shoulder. Yeah, but that wouldn't keep us together, Lydia cut in. Becca and I have been best friends for 15 years. We can't room with other people. So you're saying we should just keep living here, next to Satan? I glanced at the closet door again. Lydia shrugged. At least we'll have some stories to tell after graduation. I sighed. These aren't the kind of stories I want to tell. But it didn't take long for Lydia to actually believe my closet story. And this was because, a few days later, we were woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone whispering. I looked over at Lydia, who was already staring at me with wide eyes. She slowly brought a finger to her lips. I listened intently, trying to hear what the voice was saying and where it was coming from, but I couldn't understand even one word. I got out of my bed and tiptoed over to Lydia's bed. The whispering was definitely louder over there, but then she did share a wall with room 733. I listened intently. Never taken mouths of fools. I couldn't quite make it out. Lydia leaned over and put her ear up to the wall. The whisper suddenly stopped, and I leaned closer as well. Suddenly there was a loud bang from the other side. Lydia recoiled and clutched at her ear in pain. Someone was in there. I was so scared at that point that I was more angry, and I again threw open our door and stomped over to the supposedly empty supply room. I banged on room 733 loudly, not caring about who else I woke up in the process. I yelled, "Are you fucking kidding me? This shit is not funny anymore. Come out of that fucking room, you asshole." But silence. Room 733 didn't reply. But then, the thing I least expected happened. The doorknob of the room started to turn. I backed up so fast from the door that I actually ran into the opposite wall to the room. When the handle had turned all the way down, something started to push from the other side. The door creaked, loudly, but the locks held. I held my breath until the pressure on the door subsided and the handle slowly returned to its normal position. I noticed Lydia peeking her head out of our room. She held up her hands to me as if to say, "What happened?" "Somebody thinks they're funny," I answered her out loud. She shook her head at me and disappeared back into our room. I knelt down on the door and brought my head down to the carpet, peering under the door crack. It was the first time I had seen into the corner room. Room 733 was definitely a supply closet. There were chairs stacked along one wall and bed frames along the other. A few rotting mattresses were pulled under one of the windows and a thick layer of dust covered everything in the room. The windows were absolutely huge, which was something you couldn't really tell by looking up at the building. The windows were open as always, and I could definitely see that if someone wanted to, they could easily climb through them using the outside ledge. The thing was that the room didn't look like it had been disturbed in a couple of decades, and this sent a shiver down my spine. The moonlight, which had been providing enough light to see the room, suddenly vanished, and I saw only pitch black inside. Blinking rapidly, trying to adjust my night vision, I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them, a large yellow eye was looking back at me. Only a few inches away from my face on the other side of the door. I screamed. There was no denying that things were escalating. The next morning, Lydia and I put a dorm change request with the resident services and hoped for the best. In the meantime, we agreed to never be alone in our dormitory room at night. Either we both spent the night at home or neither of us did. We started spending most nights with our respective boyfriends. I told Ian about everything that happened, and he suggested I maybe talk to the campus paranormal society. I hesitantly made an appointment, and Lydia and I met with a small, cleanly dressed kid named Craig and 4 of his colleagues the following Tuesday. We told them everything we could remember, every incident, no matter how small. Craig and the 4 other members of the paranormal society sat quietly and took notes for half an hour. It wasn't until we finished that anyone spoke. "Is that all?" Craig asked. "Yes," I said slowly. "Would you mind waiting out the hall for a few minutes so that I may confer with my colleagues?" "Sure," Lydia smiled. "Whatever you need." The door had barely shut behind us when Lydia snorted and rolled her eyes. "Let's get out of here." "Go where?" I asked. "Are you serious?" "Lydia, come on, we need help, and I'm freaking out. We haven't stayed one night in our dormitory since Tuesday, so this isn't something we can just brush off." Lydia sighed. "Okay." She threw her hands up. "Let's hear what they have to say, and then we can go back over to the resident services and check our move requests." We loitered out in the hallway for another 15 minutes before Craig and asked us to come back and take a seat. With all the pompousness and circumstance of a meeting parliament, Craig cleared his throat and made his diagnosis. "What you're dealing with, ladies, is a very angry ghost." "Is that your professional opinion, Mr. Craig?" Lydia said. I shot her a look. Yes," he stuttered. "A vengeful spirit." "A spirit?" I asked. I very much doubted that our problems were being caused by a ghost. Yes," answered one of the not Craigs. "That ghost to the layperson." "Jesus Christ," Lydia groaned, and rubbed at her temples. Mistaking Lydia's frustration with despair, Craig rushed right into his speech. "Don't be afraid, ladies. We're going to take care of you. It's true that spirits can be quite a headache if you don't know how to exorcise them, which is why it's good you came to us. Suicides almost always result in angry ghosts. They need revenge, you see." "Revenge on whom?" I asked. "On other students, of course. Perhaps this particular spirit was bullied into taking his own life, and now seeks to torment others." I sighed. Listen. We can take care of this for you right away. This is the most juicy story we've had in a while. All we ask is a small donation to our society," Craig continued. "We honestly didn't realise that this room was having so much activity. It's actually very exciting." Great, well, thank you for your time," Lydia said, as she grabbed my arm and pulled me out of my chair. "Do you want us to set up something for you this weekend?" Craig asked. Tell you what," Lydia said. "We'll call you." Lydia hurried me out of the room wearing a wary look, and we didn't speak again until we were almost to the admin building. "That was a complete waste of time," she said. "Look, I'm not disagreeing with you, but, Becca, tell me you didn't honestly buy into that." "So, you don't think it's, I was having trouble even saying the word. It sounded so ridiculous. "A ghost?" "Well, I don't fucking know," said Lydia, "but neither do they. That guy had no idea what the fuck he was talking about." Let me put it another way, Lydia continued. They're playing Ghostbusters, but we're living the fucking Exorcist. Fine, I sighed. Then what do you suppose we do? Just keep sleeping at Mike and Ian's until we get reassigned? Listen, I just want this to end. Lydia crossed her arms and stared straight ahead. We all want this to end. Even if living next to that fucking room wasn't scary, it sure as hell is distracting. Alright, we should be okay. Our room is only ghost adjacent after all, and our new assignments will come through soon at least. I checked my watch. Fuck, it's almost 2. Shit, really? Oh, I've got to go. Mike got accepted to Sigma Chi and he's getting initiated today. The girl at the desk waved us forward. I hadn't even realised we'd reached the front of the line. Let me know what they say, okay? Lydia said as she ran out the door. The girl at the desk eyed me suspiciously as I approached. I smiled. Hi, You're one of those girls trying to move out of room 734, aren't you? She had caught me off guard. Yeah, one of them. How did you know that? Sorry, I overheard you. I also saw your file across my desk a few days ago, and I've got to ask, why are you looking to transfer rooms exactly? I was really tired. I had been beaten down. I didn't have the energy to think of a lie. Well, it's because there's some shit going on in the empty room next door and it's really freaking us out. We're scared. Noises, whispers, knocking. The other night I saw someone there. You saw someone? Yes, I replied. In room 733? Yes, what do you think I'm talking about? I looked under the door and there was definitely someone in there. The girl narrowed her eyes at me for a moment, and then nodded for no particular reason. Well, your rooms aren't ready yet, but I've pushed them through as a priority. For right now, you're stuck though. There just isn't anywhere else for you to go. I sighed. I'd figured as much. The woman at the reception relaxed a little and put on a smile. I'm Alice, she continued, and look, I've actually done a lot of research on this Riley suicides and I think I can help you. Or at the least, offer some insight. Really? I asked, hesitantly. Absolutely. I'm in Taylor Hall, room 310. I'll be back to my dormitory by 4 today. Thanks. We actually just came from the Paranormal Society on campus. Ugh, say no more. Alice rolled her eyes. Yeah, so I'll definitely see you at 4? Great, Alice said, and smiled. I got there early, but then so was she. I told our story from the second time that day, and Alice wasn't afraid to interrupt with any questions, though her queries didn't betray her thoughts. When I was finished, she leaned back to her chair and sighed deeply. I can't believe it, she shook her head. I'd always heard rumours, but I honestly doubted any of it was actually true. I can assure you, I said, everything I've told you is absolutely true. And how is it now? When you're there? We aren't ever there at night, but during the day we've heard scratching on the wall, really quiet whispering, and sometimes we still hear the window opening and closing, in broad fucking daylight. Every time I look up from the street, the windows to 733 are always open. Alice nodded. Well, for the record, I don't think you're in any danger. As much as it sucks, you guys are simply a casualty. You just need to stay out of the room 733. Are you kidding? I would never go in there, I snorted. I believe that you believe that, but this thing, whatever it is, it's tricky, manipulative, a liar, and it's smarter than you. I'll try not to be offended by that. You shouldn't be. What do you think it actually is then? I asked. Something very old, and very evil. I regarded her skeptically, and then let my eyes wander around the room. I hadn't really noticed the decor before, but to say Alice had an interest in the occult was an understatement. I can't see any situation where I would be compelled to enter that room. I know, but you have to be prepared that there may come a time when you have to make a decision about entering that room, because what you're dealing with, it's already killed 5 people. 5? I thought it was only 3. Yeah, well, not everyone is inclined to that level of research. Let's see, there was Ellen Burnham in 1961, She jumped out the window. She was very first. And then there was Tad Collinsworth in 1968. He jumped too. Marissa Grigg in 1975. She hung herself. Erin Murphy in 1979. And Eric Dalston in 1992, who also hung himself. Alice shook her head. 5 suicides. 5 suicides. How could the university still let people live in there? I replied, they don't apparently, and it's a supply room. Ah, you see, every few years, once everybody who remember the incident have graduated, the room gets reassigned. This was before the internet, you know, and the incoming freshmen were clueless. But after that last one, Eric Dalston, they closed the entire north hall of the 7th floor and built more rooms onto the south hall. I shivered. So, what does this thing want? Alice shrugged. Chaos, death, souls, who knows? No one even knows what it actually is. Okay, but so what do we do now? Alice paused. We know that it's somehow bound to that room, that it seems to have a minimal influence just outside it. We know that everyone who ever died was alone at that room, and we know that it's a trickster. That's what we know. That was not enough information. I thought to myself, why do you think they do it? I asked quietly. The victims? I nodded. All I know is what's rumoured to be in the evidence files. All the suicides were found with pictures or writings that were considered unspeakable at the time. They contained horrible, evil things that would make you physically sick to read and see, they say. And these people, they drew them? They wrote that stuff? Yep. Whatever is in that room drove them mad. That's fucking scary. Have you guys considered getting someone to bless the room? You'll have a hard time getting him, but perhaps some sort of a holy person. Alice shrugged. Maybe. The rumours in the 70s was that this was all started by a Ouija board game. Really? That shit's made by Hasbro. Not in the 60s it wasn't. Anyway, it's just a rumour. The only person on campus who would know is Tom Moen in admin. I've tried to talk to him before, but he refuses to talk to me. Did he go here in 1961? Yes, and he was staying in Riley. We need to talk to him. I need to know what the fuck is happening, or I won't be able to live the rest of my life as a well-adjusted person. Alice looked at the ground. Well, I suppose we could try chasing him down on campus. Can we talk to him tomorrow? I asked. We can try, she said. Mr. Moen wouldn't see us that day or the next. We tried to catch him on his lunch hour, and then again while he was leaving work, but he got around us every time. It was soon clear that the old man was actively avoiding us. Lydia and I had seen little of each other since we'd continued to sleep in other dorms. I went back to our room twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Usually the other room was silent, but that didn't make me feel any better. I could always sense something on the other side of the wall, somehow watching me. It felt like the calm before the storm. The Thursday before Halloween, I came back to the dorm to shower in the evening, much later than usual. I'd seen Lydia that afternoon, and she'd informed me that she had enough clothes stored at Mike's to last until graduation, so I knew I'd be there alone. I showered down the hall in the safety of the bathrooms and then walked back to my room to change. I was supposed to meet Ian in half an hour to head out to a party, and I wanted to get there as soon as possible. Since the silence was unnerving me, I threw my iPod on the docking station and turned up the AC. I got dressed and then stood in front of the mirror to dry my hair. I flipped my head over and blow-dried upside down to try and give my hair some volume. When I flipped my head back up and shut off the blow-dryer, I immediately noticed a silence in the room. But that wasn't all I noticed. It wasn't my dormitory anymore. Behind me was reflected the dusty bed frames and large open windows of room 733. I spun around in a panic to find out I was actually standing in my own room. I looked back at the mirror to see that 733 still reflected there. A slight movement behind me was all it took to make me run for my life. I grabbed my purse and phone and I fled from my room, slamming the door behind me. On the elevator ride down, I called Alice. "I can't do it anymore," I said when she picked up. "I can't ever go back." "What happened?" I told her. "Jesus, what do you want to do?" she asked. "I need to talk to someone who knows what the fuck is going on. Is Tom Moen the only person we know who was here in 1961? "The only one I know of," she said. "Maybe we can get him on his way tomorrow morning? We'll just corner him and refuse to move until he tells us something. He comes in at 6:30 according to the schedule I have. Do you want to meet me outside the Starbucks?" "Fuck yeah, I do. I have a class at 7:30, but I'll blow it off." "Okay, I'll see you then." I didn't really like parties, but I was glad I was going to one that night. As soon as we got there, I asked Ian to get me a drink. Since I wasn't really that much of a drinker, he gave me a raised eyebrow. So I decided to give him a brief synopsis of what had happened earlier, hoping he wouldn't think I was crazy. He made me a scotch and coke. It was the first of many. Around midnight, I went to have a cigarette and checked my phone. I had a voicemail from Lydia left at 11:04 PM. "Hey Becca, listen, I just had a huge fucking fight with Mike. I guess his frat decided that for Halloween this year, all the new brothers would have to spend a night at the suicide room. In our dorm. I just can't fucking take it. He knows what's been going on with us, and he still agreed to do this. He's now trying to convince me that Sigma Chi is behind all of the stuff going on in that room, because they've been trying to drum up buzz for the Halloween deal." I hit end and threw my phone in the bag. No wonder Lydia was pissed. This was not good. Not good at all. I found Ian inside and asked him to take me home. I was suddenly very stressed, very tired, and very drunk all at the same time. When the alarm went off at 6 AM, it took everything I had to pull myself out of bed. I got dressed in the clothes I'd worn the night before and shuffled my way across campus to the atrium. Alice was already there with a black coffee in hand. "I'd figured you'd need this," she laughed. "How'd you know?" "Your texts. I texted you last night." "Yeah, about 1. You told me about Sigma Chi." "Oh god, yeah." I pushed up my sunglasses even higher and pulled my hood lower over my eyes. "Those guys are complete fools," Alice continued. "Remember how I told you that it's crafty? Well, what if the point of messing with you was to make 733 provocative, you know? To seduce people into going inside? No one has been in that room for years. Can you imagine how hungry that thing is?" "Do you think they're really at risk?" I asked as I sat down on the steps of the admin building. "Yes, I think they're very much in danger. The only benefit is that they're going in a group, not individually." "So it'll be less powerful with all of them there?" "Theoretically," Alice said. "We would know a lot more if we knew what it actually was. And we can't know what it is without knowing how it got here. And that is why we need Moen." "What time is he supposed to get here?" 20 minutes ago, Alice said grimly. It was another half an hour before we resigned ourselves to the fact that Mr. Moen had snuck around us as usual. We went to the front office, hoping to beg again for an appointment with him anyway. The woman at the admin desk regarded us coldly. "Tom isn't coming today, or any other day for that matter. He quit yesterday. Looks like you won't be harassing him anymore." "We weren't harassing him," I said. "We just desperately need to talk to him." "And we still do," added Alice. "Well, you won't get any of his personal information from me." She snidely walked away. "What the fuck do we do now?" I asked Alice. "Without Tom Moen, there's nothing we can do, I'm afraid." "Alice, fuck. I can't go back to that room." Alice smiled. "Don't worry. Your transfers actually came through yesterday." I was stunned. "They did?" I said, elated. "Yep. I got the notice when I checked my work email this morning. You're going to Morton and Lydia is going to Tinsley. Oh, thank God, I sighed. I thought you'd be happy about that. I also convinced my boss not to assign anyone else to room 734. Thank fuck. I didn't want the same thing that happened to us happening to someone else. The only thing is you won't be able to move in until Monday though. I can't last through the weekend, especially now that the end is in sight. I have to tell Lydia. I opened my phone to put out Lydia's number, and then my attention was caught by the fact that I hadn't finished listening to her voicemail message. I can't even look at his dumb face anymore, so I'm going to head home. Don't worry about me. I'll be okay. I'm drunk enough to sleep through any bullshit from next door. I'm just so fucking pissed off right now. I would honestly rather deal with dumb shit Beth. Let's hang out tomorrow. Love you. The message ended. Oh dear God. Alice gave me a questioning look. I slowly turned around to look at her. Lydia's spent the night in our dorm. Alice cringed. She's safe though, right? As long as she didn't go into room 733. She won't, I tried to convince myself. I thought of the always open large windows of the corner room. If nothing else, the mere thought of those would keep Lydia the head out of that room. Good. Well, since we have nothing else to do you want to go and look for those theology books in the library? It's pretty much the only thing open right now. I shrugged. Sure. I didn't have another class until 10. The little old lady who sat behind the library checkout desk must have been 1,000 years old. Mr. Stapley's eyes were small and watery, and her skin looked like it was melting off her skull. Still, she was nice and knowledgeable, and she sent us in the right direction for books on demonology, though she gave us a curious look as she did. There wasn't much. We read everything we could, but it was either not relevant or wasn't in English. We returned to her desk 30 minutes later. Excuse me, do you have anything on the occult? The occult? Her voice trailed off. Yes I do. Over there to the left of the reference section. Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm too hungover to use the decimal system, I said. I don't think she likes the look of us, Alice whispered as we walked away. Our look or our subject matter? Probably neither, Alice replied. Within the hour, we were back up at the desk, having struck out again. We could tell she was getting annoyed as her eyes narrowed suspiciously as we approached. Ah, sorry, do you know where we could find something on seances on Ouija boards or... Now listen, girls. Mrs. Stapley stood up from her desk and looked over at us through her glasses. I really hope this is for class. It is, I said. It's not. Alice answered simultaneously. It's personal research. Research? What kind of research? Look, we're not going to mess with a Ouija board or anything, I said. Good. Mrs. Stapley smoothed her plaited pants and sat back down. Because I can't have that sort of thing going on here again, she continued. Again? Alice latched on. The older woman suddenly looked very uncomfortable and started fidgeting with a stack of books on her desk. Mrs. Stapley, we're actually researching what happened in Riley in 1961, Alice said. And also what's been happening there ever since. The older woman continued to fidget. Well, it's no secret, is it? A student committed suicide in that room. Dreadful, but not unheard of on a university campus. 5 students, I corrected her. But you know that, right? Alice was suddenly talking very fast, because you sound like you were well versed in the story. Please, tell us how it started and we might be able to end this. End it? Mrs. Stapley's voice became quieter, but more concentrated. Don't be so arrogant, young lady. You can't end it. People have always died in that room, and they always will. There is no end to it, so you best stay far away from it. But maybe if we knew how this all started. It started just as you think it did. But everyone that was involved is either very old or very dead by now. Just stay away from that room, take my advice, and concentrate on your studies. I leaned over the desk. Well, I'd love to myself, but they assigned me and my friend to the room next door to room 733. Maybe you can forget about all the suicides, but we can't. It won't fucking let us. Mrs. Stapley's voice was even quieter now. Young lady, I'll never forget. My friend Ellen was the very first to be killed in that room. She was my very best friend, and not a night goes by that I don't imagine her wiggling out of that tiny window, standing upon the cold ledge in her bare feet and jumping off the 7th floor of that building. Alice sighed. I'm really sorry. We didn't know. Yes, well, these are old wounds, my dear. Now girls, I suggest you request a room reassignment immediately. No one should be living on the 7th floor of that building, and that's all I'm going to tell you about it. Alice sighed but resigned herself with a nod. We wouldn't learn anything more here. Still, this was quite a breakthrough. At least we had some information now. Alice walked away and I made to follow her, but my feet wouldn't move. Something was bothering me. A small yet pungent word had been buried in Miss Stapley's story. A word that suddenly seemed very important. Mrs. Stapley, I asked a tired old woman at the desk. Why did you refer to the window in 733 as tiny? Because I've seen those windows and they're huge, like 5 feet tall. Dear, you're talking about the corner room. That's the supply closet. Room 733 is the room next door to that. No, I stuttered. That's room 734. Yes, well, it is now. When they built the additional rooms on the south hall, they moved all the room numbers down. Oh dear God. I suddenly started to feel hot and very dizzy. That sneaky fucker, Alice whispered next to me, her skin paling. Oh no, Lydia! We took off across the campus at a dead run, witnessed only by the few blurry-eyed students on their way to morning classes. When Riley finally came into view, I stumbled on the pavement as my blood turned to ice. From our vantage point, we could clearly see the windows of the corner room were closed, the first and only time I'd ever seen them that way. And the window to my room was open. We ran into the lobby, pushing past several latte-sipping freshmen who had just gotten off the elevator. I hit 7 and watched the doors close more slowly than they ever had before. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Alice, how the fuck did this happen? I don't know, I don't fucking know. She's been in there all night. Alice, in our room, alone. Alice shook her head, but had nothing to say. When the doors finally opened on floor 7, we saw a quiet, deserted hallway. I ran towards my room with Alice right behind me. Rounding the corner, I threw open my door, hoping it wasn't locked. And it wasn't. Lydia looked back at me. And for a breathless moment, a cruel glimmer of hope crossed over her tear-streaked face. But we were too late. The next second, she leaned forward ever so slightly, and she passed from our sight. She screamed the entire way down. Alice ran to the ledge where Lydia had just been while I stood, emotionless. She stuck her head out the window and looked down just as a different kind of screaming started from the bottom floor. Alice closed her hand over her mouth and pulled her head back into the room as tears of shock ran down her ghost-white face. The screaming from outside got louder as more people saw what remained of my best friend on the cold pavement. I leaned back against the dresser and slumped to the floor. A falling death. Lydia had never wanted a falling death. I absent-mindedly picked up one of the pictures that were strewn all over the floor. It was a picture of Lydia's mother. She was dead. I picked up another picture, and it was Lydia's baby sister. She was dead too. There were dozens of pictures just like it all over the floor. Lydia had been busy last night. As for the things depicted in them, I cannot tell you. Lydia was a talented artist, and I only saw a few before I got sick on the floor next to me. Alice was standing in the hallway, yelling something down the hall. I don't know what she was saying, because all I could hear was a high-pitched whine in the room. Suddenly, a piece of paper slid out from under the crack in the closet door and glided across the floor towards me. I picked it up and studied it for a moment. This was drawn by Lydia too, but it wasn't like the others. It was a picture of the closet from my exact vantage point. In the drawing, the door was cracked, and there was something looking back from the darkness. I put the paper down and studied the closet. The door was cracked open, just like the picture. I squinted my eyes and tried to see inside. I thought I could make out a long face looking back at me, but Alice pulled me to my feet. "We need to get out of here," I thought I heard her say. I never went back into that room after that. My parents moved my things and I spent the rest of the semester in an apartment off campus. I transferred to an out-of-state school for my spring semester and finished my degree there. Every night I dream of Lydia pulling herself through that tiny window, shimming out of the cold edge, standing up and knowing there's nothing between her body and the terrifying abyss in front of her. I watched her look down 7 stories to the black pavement below and realise, though not accept, her terrible fate. I see the blind horror across her familiar features. I hear her wildly pounding heart, desperately trying to race through every beat of life she should have lived, and knowing it only has mere seconds left. It's been 9 years since that night, and every full semester for 9 years I've called resident services to see which dorms are open for new student assignments. Riley is always open, but the 7th floor is closed for good. This year life and work got in the way and I called much later than usual. I was put on hold immediately. "Resident services," a man finally answered. "Were you the one asking about open rooms in Riley?" "Yes, that's me," I replied. "We're entirely filled up, and there's a long waiting list for Riley, but as it happens you actually have great timing. I make no promises, but we may be able to get you in. We just got an approval this morning." "Approval for what?" I asked, dreading the answer. "We're opening up the 7th floor." A story to scare my son. "Son, we need to have a chat about internet safety." I slowly crumpled down onto the floor next to him. His laptop was open and he was playing Minecraft on a public server. His eyes were locked into the action. Comments scrolled down the side of the screen in a chat box. "Son, can you stop your game for just a minute?" He exited the world, closed the laptop, and looked up at me, annoyed. "Dad, is this going to be another cheesy, scary story?" "What?" I faked hurt feelings for a second, and then grinned at him. "I thought you liked my cautionary tales." He'd grown up listening to my stories about children who encountered witches, ghosts, werewolves, and trolls. Like many generations of parents, I use scary stories to reinforce morals and teach lessons about safety. Single dads like me should use all their parenting tools at their disposal. He scrunched his face a little. "They were fine when I was 6, but now that I'm getting older, they don't scare me anymore. They seem kind of silly. If you're going to tell a story about the internet, can you make it really, really scary? I squinted at him incredulously. He folded his arms. Dad, I'm an adult now. I'm 10 and I can handle it. I thought to myself. Okay, I'll try. So I began. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Colby. His expression indicated that he wasn't impressed with the terror of the introduction. He sighed deeply and settled in for another of Dad's cheesy stories. I continued. Colby went online and joined several children's websites. After a while, he started talking to other kids in-game and on the message board. He made friends with another 10-year-old boy named Helper23. They liked the same games and shows. They laughed at each other's jokes, and they explored new games together. After several months of friendship, Colby gave Helper23 6 diamonds in a game they were playing. This was a very generous gift. Colby's birthday was coming up, and Helper23 wanted to send him a cool present in real life. Colby figured it wouldn't hurt to give Helper23 his home address, as long as he promised not to tell it to any strangers or grown-ups. Helper23 swore he wouldn't tell anyone else, not even his own parents, and set about mailing the package. I paused the story and asked my son, "Do you think that was a good idea?" "No," my son said, shaking his head vigorously. In spite of himself, I could tell he was getting into the story. I continued, "Well, neither did Colby. Colby felt guilty about giving away his home address, and his guilt began to grow, and grow. By the time he had put on his pajamas the next night, his guilt and fear were larger than anything else in his entire life. He resolved to admit the truth to his parents. The punishment would be steep, but it was worth it to have a clear conscience. He squirmed in his bed as he waited for his parents to tuck him in. My son knew the scary part was coming up. In spite of all his tough talk, he leaned forward, wide-eyed. I spoke quietly and deliberately. He heard all the noises of the house. The washing machine bounced around in the laundry room. Branches scraped against the brick outside his room. His baby brother cooed in the nursery. And there were some other noises he couldn't quite pinpoint. Finally, his dad's footsteps echoed down the hall. "Hey, Dad," he called out nervously. "I have something to tell you." His dad immediately stuck out his head in the doorway at a weird angle. In the darkness, his mouth didn't seem to move and his eyes were all wrong. "Yes, son." The voice was way off too. Colby pulled his covers up, defensively. Is Mum around?" "Here I am." Mum's head popped into the doorway below Dad's. Her voice was at a unnatural falsetto. "Were you about to tell us that you gave your home address to Helper23? You shouldn't have done that. We told you never to give personal information on the internet." She continued. "He wasn't really a kid. He just pretended to be one. Do you know what he did? He came to our house, broke in, and murdered both of us, just so he could spend some time with you." A fat man in a wet jacket emerged in the child's doorway holding the 2 severed heads. Colby shrieked and gasped as the man dropped the heads on the ground, unsheathed his knife, and moved into the room to work on the boy. At that point, my son screamed too. He twisted his hands defensively over his face, but we were just getting started with the story. After several hours, the boy was almost dead, and his screams had become whimpers. The kid had noticed the wailing of a baby in another room and removed his knife from Colby. This was a special treat. He had never murdered a baby before, and was excited about the prospect. Helper, 23, left Colby to die and followed the cries through the house like a homing beacon. In the nursery, he walked to the crib, picked up the baby and held it in his arms. He moved towards the changing table to get a better look at the baby. But as he held the baby, the crying died down. The baby looked up and smiled. Helper, 23, had never held a baby, but he gently bounced it in his arms like a pro. He wiped his bloody hands on the blanket so he could stroke the baby's cheek. "Hey there, sweet little guy." The beautiful rage of sadism melted into something warmer and softer. He walked out of the nursery, took the baby home, and named him William, and raised him as his very own. After I'd finished the story, my son was visibly shaken. Between ragged, staccato breaths, he stammered, But Dad, my name's William." I gave him a classic dad wink, and tousled his hair. "Of course it is." William ran up the stairs to his bedroom in a fury of sobs. But deep down, I think he liked the story.